As upsetting and controversial as it can be around here when we see Confederate battle flags still being flown by those who actually are trying to remember the fight to defend slavery with shameless enthusiasm, the American South is not the only place that this symbol of racism and slavery still appears. In fact, this photo is from a graveyard just outside of Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's one of the less well-known aspects of American history that more than 1,000 Southern families who owned slaves at the end of the Civil War moved to Brazil because it was the last country in the Western world where slavery was still legal. And there they continued what they believed was the only way that they believed that agriculture could actually be done. The descendants of those recalcitrant Southerners still have Confederate Celebration Day in Brazil even now. And yes, it is weird, but racism is still a serious problem in Brazil, just as it is still in much of the United States. It would be easy to cast these people as being just really evil or very stupid. But my fear is that there's also something else at work here. My patriarchal family ran a slave plantation in Kentucky. The Civil War plunged my family into poverty after the slaves were freed and the assets of the plantation were plundered. They continued to try to make a living on the farmland for 100 years before my descendants largely turned to other professions to escape poverty. I spent many Sunday afternoons as a child in the old plantation house where my aunt and uncle lived, and it was not rare for the adults in the family gathered in the living room to let the conversation drift into the good old days, repeating the fables that they had heard about our family when we were prosperous and happy, convincing themselves that slavery was really not all that bad. While 100 years after the Civil War had not delivered my hillbilly relatives to even the threshold of some racial sensitivity, I can tell you they still were not the worst human beings in the world. Morally blind to reality, to be sure, but generally speaking, they were not criminals. They were honest, hardworking people who had simply bought into the cultural assumptions of their surrounding society. It was broadly believed in the 19th century South that the whole world depended upon the agricultural products of the American South, but that the heat and humidity of the region was just too much for white laborers to bear, and that the black race was uniquely suited for this kind of labor. Therefore, they argued, slavery was crucial to the maintenance not only of their economy, but in fact the cotton mills and dinner tables of the world were somehow dependent upon the institution of slavery. Sure, they were racist, but they also assumed that things were the way they were because they couldn't realistically be any other way, that the world couldn't have gone on without them. At least a part of what they lacked was the imagination to conceive of a different way of providing labor, that the arrangement of slavery was the purchase of a slave was paying ahead for another 20 or 30 years of labor, and then they thought that was how it had to work. Even now in our own area, it is very difficult to get a new roof put on your house with anything other than Spanish-speaking labor who are probably all undocumented. It's rare to find someone who works in a nail salon who is not Vietnamese and probably not legal citizens. I love the internet meme that says, I keep waiting for someone to tell me, yeah, I used to be a fruit picker until those illegal immigrants showed up. Whenever our borders become sufficiently impenetrable to keep undocumented workers out, strawberries rot in the field. Apples, oranges, peaches just fall to the ground and rot. And the prices of everything from chickens to lawn services goes up because not many American citizens are even willing to do these jobs for the pay that is offered for them. But at a more common level, as we are now emerging from the unemployment that was caused by the pandemic, many employers are finding it difficult to fill many low-wage jobs. They are complaining, as they certainly did to our governor in Missouri, that nobody wants to work anymore. But employers who are paying $15 or more an hour don't appear to have any difficulty in finding employees to hire, but it is the employers whose business model is based on paying a minimum wage that is still $7.25 an hour. It hasn't changed in a dozen years. It wasn't a living wage in 2009, but it has only become increasingly unsufferable since then. But the industry that's having the most difficulty in getting back into full operation is the food service industry, where the minimum wage for tip workers is still, and if you don't already know the number, pay attention, you get paid $2.13 an hour. And that has been the same for 20 years. 20 years. Now, some of these tipped workers actually do make a substantial amount of money in tips, but not all of them. And restaurant owners schedule their servers to come in early and to stay late to do cleaning, setup, and prep work when they're not serving any customers who are going to tip them. So restaurant owners make these people work for $2.13 an hour to do work without which they could not run a restaurant. But it doesn't involve them having any opportunity to make more than $2 an hour. Now, I have a good friend who owns a restaurant who's gotten very angry with me for my sermons and articles in which I've advocated for a $15 an hour minimum wage. She insists this would run me out of business. And I can tell you, as a matter of my own family history, when the institution of slavery became illegal, you couldn't make a living on a farm if you tried to farm in exactly the same way that you did with slave labor. The end of slavery brought on an industrial revolution that made farming increasingly mechanized, to the point that most large farming operations are run not with hundreds of employees, but with 2 or 3 who manage huge farm implements that do almost all of the back-breaking labor of agriculture. Drive through much of Kansas and Oklahoma by the back roads, and you will encounter one ghost town after another, because agriculture no longer employs many people, and there's just no need for all of the businesses that once supported the farming community, the churches, the hardware stores, the feed stores, the banks. They're all closed. The population of rural Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, as well as Illinois and much of Indiana, is actually just a fraction of what it was 150 years ago. Even though the population in the United States has gone up by 4 times, the population in rural areas has actually gone down because everyone has moved to metropolitan areas where they can find employment. But folks, what I'm trying to tell you is that labor is not a way of life, it is a commodity. The cost of labor is calculated into the cost of food, cars, clothing, retail goods, airplane tickets, everything. So you increase labor costs. Somewhere to balance the books, you have to typically increase prices from everything from hamburgers to airplane tickets. And we've gotten used to cheap food because our low minimum wages in restaurants and underpaid undocumented workers in agriculture. But increases in the minimum wage do not result in increases exactly the way you might think. If you double the minimum wage, if you increase it by 100%, the cost of a Big Mac will not double. In fact, economists estimate that the cost of a Big Mac would go up by 17 cents if you started paying every McDonald's worker $15 an hour. They make a lot of Big Macs in an hour. In many countries that have a minimum wage that already is twice what ours is, in Australia, for example, the actual cost of a Big Mac is actually less than it is in the United States. And those Australian employees also enjoy free universal health care, as workers do in all but one Western democracy, and that one is the United States of America. Now, that's not to say that raising the minimum wage to a living wage, which, for argument's sake, let's say it's $15 an hour, though $15 an hour might be a modestly living wage in the parts of the Midwest. It certainly wouldn't be in most metropolitan areas, especially on the coast. But even that would cause some labor-intensive businesses to close. Right now, one former newspaper writer who was a friend of mine wrote a piece once that said if everyone in Springfield got up at exactly the same time and went out for cashew chicken, they could all find a seat in a restaurant immediately. The truth is that if we started paying their staff a fair wage, a lot of them would close. That's the nature of changes in economy. And again, to be realistic, you couldn't raise the minimum wage to $50 an hour all at once without sending destabilizing shockwaves through the whole of the world's economy. But gradual increases towards a realistic living wage have actually been shown not to cost us, but to stimulate the economy. Give a poor person an extra $250 a week, and they're not going to invest that in an offshore bank account. They're going to go to local retail shops and spend it. It generates tax income, it generates business in the communities where those people live. Now, the reason that this is sermon material, in my opinion, and if you've never heard a sermon on a living wage in your church, I'm not going to tell you to look for another church, but you should. But the reason why, for me, this is a spiritual issue is because we have a deep interest in justice. We are the kind of people who are always advocating for decreasing suffering, especially suffering that is caused by greed or racism or ignorance. I'm talking about the minimum wage because the income disparity in our country is obscene, and the balance of incomes is going to have to be restruck or it will destroy American capitalism. I'll talk about that more next week. But where the church and the Chamber of Commerce really ought to be able to hold hands is in an awareness that low wages increase the crime rate, which increases at the same time as it increases demands for a larger police force, it increases the demand for social services like subsidized housing and Medicaid and food assistance. It is no secret that the largest welfare recipient in America is Walmart. Many of us, as a matter of principle, refuse to shop at Walmart because of their abusive employer practices. But folks, you don't have to go to Walmart. Your tax dollars already go to Walmart. You pay billions of dollars in taxes to support the housing, health care, and food subsidies of the people who work at Walmart. It doesn't come as a surprise that the wealthy try to become more wealthy, and that they often do that by arranging the economy so that the public, through taxation, pay most of their business costs, while they increase their profits. That's going to be what they want. But the question before us is, to what degree do we allow it to happen? Rich people will always want to be richer. We, the people, have to decide what the boundaries are of exactly how much income disparity we think will be sustainable in our society. And at this point in history, we have allowed this disparity to grow to such a degree that many of the richest people in the world, the Walton family, Sam Walton's 3 heirs who started Walmart, they still own more than 50% of the stock in Walmart, and they are now the nation's largest beneficiaries of public welfare, since we, the taxpayers, are paying most of the salary costs for their employees. But this isn't purely a matter of greed. Like the American slave owners who moved to Brazil because they just couldn't imagine farming without slave labor, Walmart is deeply invested in keeping wages low. They go to huge extremes to make sure that there's no unions that organize their employees, and they buy slave-produced goods from the third world, all they say to keep their profits up. But does it really work? We're about to get our first Costco box store here in my area. It'll open next month, and it will be the first real competition given to Walmart and Sam's Clubs. Costco is unionized. They pay their employees a living wage from day one, starting employees. And still, their prices are about the same, and their profitability, if you own stock in Walmart and Sam's or Costco, the profitability of Costco is twice the profitability of Walmart because their employees are happier, they don't steal as much, they retain their employees, and they don't have to have as many because they're much more productive. If you can make more money by paying your employees more, then your real reason for keeping salaries low is about something other than greed, isn't it? Like those Southerners who took their slaves to Brazil, profit may have been the stated goal, but underneath that, there is an assumption that we're better than the workers, an assumption of classism, of class superiority. Sure, racism, but that's not the case at Walmart. It's just class. I was floored when one of the Walton family started this fabulous museum that they have down there in Bentonville, Arkansas, that she explained to the press that we have been so fortunate to become so wealthy in the United States, we were looking for a way to give back. And an art museum was her best idea. Now, I've been to the museum. It's a fabulous collection. It is a wonder of architecture. Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas. But it didn't seem to occur to them that they could have paid their employees more or provided health insurance or pension funds, anything. The Walton family is greedy, to be sure, but they also have a deficit of both imagination and compassion because they could be even more wealthy if they were more generous. Proud Americans talk about our country being so great because of our freedom and our democracy. And sure, slaves on plantations are not free to move about, but if your freedom in America, if your freedom is to move from starvation wages at McDonald's to starvation wages at Walmart, how free are you? As long as we keep minimum wages at $7.25 an hour, are the poor among us actually free? In my experience in doing relief work in Nicaragua, if you try to buy land in Nicaragua, it comes with so many hectares of land and so many laborers. You're buying the land and the people who live on it who work there. They're free, technically. They could move, but they could only move to another plantation where they would be compensated basically the same. So that's not really freedom, is it? It's not slavery in the sense of Southern slavery where slave owners kept the same slaves on the same plantation, but we have reimagined slavery so that now we've got a minimum wage floor that allows people to change jobs and change cities, but not change their circumstances. Are they then really a part of democracy? Especially if they work at places that prevent them from unionizing. And oftentimes, to be realistic, they keep them from voting. Why isn't Election Day in the United States a national holiday like it is in most democracies? Or why can't everyone vote on Saturday or Sunday? Why do we always hold elections on Tuesdays during normal office hours? Isn't it obvious that this gives tremendous advantage to business owners and managers who can control their hours and leave for a couple of hours to go vote if they want to, but hourly employees have none of those liberties? But what is more close to my heart as a pastor, and I think to all of us as spiritual people, is that a century ago, our country used to talk a lot about liberty and equality. Now it seems like we've just shortened that to freedom. Whatever happened to the word equality as an American value? It's almost like we've become afraid to say the word. Lady Justice appears in courthouse art as statues and paintings, blindfolded and holding up scales to announce that all are equal in the law. But are the rich and the poor equal in the halls of justice? Are white and black defendants equal when they are defendants in a court? If the Trump administration showed us nothing else, especially with Attorney General Bill Barr, we don't have a justice system. We have a legal system. We have laws, but we don't have a lot of justice. The wealthy and powerful can literally stage a violent coup to overthrow our democracy, and 6 months later, only the most gullible pawns have been arrested, but none of the organizers, none of the instigators, none of the people who plan to benefit from the coup have even been charged. Heck, their lackeys in the Republican Party won't even allow them to be investigated, because it would be like looking for the elephant in the room. It wouldn't take you very long to find it. And if an honest investigation took place, Donald Trump, Bill Barr, and our own Senator Josh Hawley would be charged with treason in a matter of minutes. It's so obvious we're not doing it because we're not even allowed to talk about it in any official capacity. We don't have a justice system. We have a legal system that can be used to punish the poor for being poor, while turning a blind eye to the crimes of the wealthy and the powerful. You have to remember in their day that slavery was legal, that the 19th century genocide of Native Americans was legal. The 20th century German genocide of Jews was legal. It was legal, but it wasn't moral. It can be legal, but not be just. The legal system is used to keep poor people poor in our day. It's legal, but it isn't fair. We religious people are the ones who still believe that equality is a part of what it means to be patriotic, even if everyone around us has almost forgotten. I contend that the way that things stand now, our minimum wage really is just a reconfiguration of slave labor. Our hypocritical laws about immigration also forms, a layer of slavery that is actually necessary to run agriculture, the hotel and motel business, and construction industries, and a huge portion of our restaurant industry. I insist that prisons are being used to create slave labor camps that also transfer tax dollars to the profit of corporations. And all of this is happening under the guise of democracy when it is, in any fair view, the absolute opposite of democracy. But are we bad people if we let this go on? Are we evil if we peacefully accept this inequality, this level of poverty and violence? Maybe. Or maybe most of us are really kind of like my hillbilly relatives who just lacked imagination to envision a world that could move past slavery, that could move past the exploitation of immigrants and the poor, that worked together for the common good. Remember, before In God We Trust, even our currency said, E pluribus unum, to make one nation, one people out of different races, languages, religions, and tribes of the world, united in liberty and equality. I don't think that we are fundamentally evil, but I do think that we lack both compassion and imagination. I don't hate America, but I do believe in a better America. I'm not willing to settle for the status quo because I can imagine something that could be so much better. The poet Robert Browning said, but a man's reach should exceed his grasp. or what's a heaven for? Folks, what I'm saying is that we cannot just accept the way that things are as being the only way that things can be. We have to imagine better, more, for all of the people of the world. And if nothing else, at least be ready to burn your Sam's card and start going to Costco. Baby steps, people, because there is much more that we have every right to hope for. Amen. Thanks.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.